we're outraged by the sex scandal regarding Petraeus, but we're not outraged by his participation in these wars. How do you explain this?
Well, only in America. I think we watch too much television, and the wars are not really televised, are they? The brutality of the wars are not really televised. And that is one of the differences from the Vietnam War. I think one of the reasons that finally it was brought to its knees was because the networks showed the body bags coming home. They showed the carnage. They showed the villages that were blown up and all of that. And the sex scandals. I mean, that's what America breeds on. It seems like these days. That's what so many people of America are concerned about. But it's a real tragedy of what's happened. I think if we look really honestly at what General Petraeus had done in both of those wars, that it's not. I'm very concerned about that he is called a hero in many sections. I don't believe he was at all. I think the policies and the procedures that he implemented were very disastrous in both Iraq and I think they are in Afghanistan too. You know, I hate to say that as a senior military leader, but I think the image of the United States has really suffered greatly for what we have done and the types of military operations and CIA operations that we've conducted.
At least as of a couple of years ago, there was some resentment at least in the U.S. Air Force, about the drone program when drone operators in Las Vegas were being given combat ribbons for their participation in the Afghanistan war. And I don't know if that still exists or not, but I know that particularly among combat pilots in the Air Force, there was a great deal of resentment because of that. And and it kind of spilled over to the drone program in general. Probably not because they were adverse to killing people, but just generally because they didn't consider that to be an honorable way of engaging an enemy. And I don't know if you can speak to that at all, or if Bill, Bobo, or anyone else who's been involved with the Veterans for Peace thing. And also, but with respect to what you were saying about the Israeli, about the Gaza Peace Flotilla, and the United States accepting the report of the Israeli investigation into that atrocity. That would be like the United States accepting the Israeli report on the attack on the USS Liberty in 1967, for those who are old enough to remember.
Well, I'll answer both of those. The USS Liberty was attacked in June 1967 by the Israeli military in 8 hours of strafing with jets and torpedoes fired at the vessel, killing 34 people, wounding 171. The Israelis later said, "Oh, we made a mistake. We didn't know it was a U.S. ship," and yet there were American flags flying everywhere, and more flags brought out as they were under attack and could see the markings of the Israeli jets there. And I know that for a fact because one of the people that was on the Gaza flotilla was a survivor of that attack. His name's Joe Metters. He's now the president of the USS Liberty Association. And Joe told us in great detail about what happened when the Israelis attacked him. 40 years later, he was attacked again on the Gaza flotilla. He also went with me to Turkey to testify at that hearing. On the drones, yeah, there has been a lot of consternation among the Air Force personnel about the drones and who flies them and what they get. And it turns out that now we are training more drone operators than we are jet pilots now. That's how big this program is. But there are complications, or there are ramifications of being a drone pilot, that now we have drone operators that are suffering from post-traumatic stress, that are, because they see what they've done, and they go home at night, they play with their kids, they read the newspaper the next morning or the following morning or whatever, and there in the newspaper it was, it was the wedding party that was killed, it was something else. So I think you may have some comment on
Well,
program.
I think the thing is I kind of have a perspective because I worked at Nellis for 10 years and I came in contact with a lot of these people. And I do know what you're saying about the arguments about the ribbons, because honestly, if you work for the government in any capacity during a war, you can get a ribbon. I'm a civilian employee now, but I can have a ribbon from the Gulf War, I can have it from Iraq, I can get one from Afghanistan because I worked for the government during wartime. And I think the ribbons are handed out kind of like candy now. It's like, nah, I don't want one of those. But the thing is that, you know, you talk about the guys going home, and I do see that, and I know somebody who was trained to be a drone pilot. And they offered him to stay at Creech a longer time. He's like, no, I don't think so. He didn't like it. He hated it because it was like, well, you know, if you remember the Gulf War, we called it the Nintendo War. But this one, they were calling it like World of Warcraft because the graphics were so much clearer. And the cameras are such that they can actually see like within a meter of what they're hitting. And it was so funny, you mentioned something about them just now admitting that we have a drone program. I always thought that was funny because in my drives up there, we would see, they would actually teach these guys, they'd have them kind of take a little quick dip down 95 to scare the people going up the old Reno highway. They would actually buzz the highway. And that was for years. And a friend of mine who works with me, the first time I took him up there, he's Egyptian. He had never seen the drones before. And he was looking at them, he's going, well, what the heck are those? And I said, well, those are Predators and Reapers. And he was like, really? He had never seen them before. He had never seen one up, and it was it. They were just flying all day long, you know, just doing start and stops, like, you know, they really are just like flying RC planes. And you look at it, when you realize what they do, as I said, when I saw the ladies outside, I felt so bad because I couldn't talk to them. But, you know, in a government staff car, I probably, yeah.
You would have been in trouble.
I'd be underneath Leavenworth.
Well, that's true. Well, let me just mention, you know, these Predators and the names that our military assigns to all of this stuff. You know, they call a missile, a ballistic missile, a peacekeeper missile, and then the Hellfire missiles that are on as the weapons on the Reaper and on the Predator. All of these. An interview with a Pakistani general who said that it was his belief that the United States Army was gaining power, and that you mentioned that our political power, and mentioned that the Republican conventions that the candidates were buying, or presidential candidates were buying, you know, to see kind of who could say they would use the military to kill the most people, and kind of currying favor with the military. Well, you know, it is the delicate thing where our military is subordinate to our civilian government, and trying to keep it that way when you have a Congress that wants to do everything in its power to get things in their congressional districts that have to do with the military, because that's money for the community, that's jobs for the community. And so a lot of our government officials curry favor with the military to get them to say that they want weapon systems that can be built in their congressional districts. And there are instances when the military has come back to say, we don't need that weapon system. We just don't need it. And then Congress kind of forces it down their throat. But as far as, you know, how the institutions of the military, whether, you know, what type of influence that they have on the civilian administrations, it's substantial. It certainly is. I mean, the military advisor to the president and the Secretary of Defense, those are key advisors. And I would say, and many times, it's actually our military that is kind of dragging its feet on military operations. That it's the military. I don't think that there are a lot of generals that are gung-ho, ready to go to war. I think it's the politicians that are ready to go to war and are telling the military, you know, you figure this out, but we're going to do it. And I think that's exactly what happened on Iraq. How drones are used on their own populations. How drones may be used on us. I mean, law enforcement agencies in the United States are ready to get these drones. And many of them have them. There are 4 communities that already have them. The FAA has been told that by the end of next year, they have to identify 6 areas in the United States that will be used to practice integrating drones into commercial airspace. And by the year 2016, there has to be the capability within our air control system to accommodate 30,000 drones into commercial airspace. Being used for, and not all is being used for military purposes. There are drones that are used for surveillance of pipelines, forests, you know, looking out. Well, we have 3 drones on the southern border watching for drug stuff and illegal people coming over the borders. And we've got 1 drone up in Canada. There are great environmental uses for these things, to have them out in areas where it's very difficult to get humans out in those areas. But the concern is on our security and privacy, and drones that are small enough that they can fly in through a window and they can go up and down the stairway of your house and go into your study and look over your shoulder. And if the National Security Agency isn't already tapping into your phone and into your email system, the little drone could look there and just beam back what they're seeing. I mean, all sorts of abuses are inherent in this, but the international regulation of drones is certainly something that we are working on. That it is important that there be regulation about how these things can be used, as there are regulations on different weapon systems.
Is the UN taking this up? What agency? Is there an international agency that is
The UN is starting to look at it, as the international, ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, that's located up in Montreal.
Have you considered picketing the drone scientists?
Have we been picketing the drone scientists? We have been out in front of many of the big drone manufacturers. And actually, I'm sure, we were talking, there are drone manufacturers around this area, aren't there?
I know the Israeli drone maker called it.
There's an Israeli drone maker in South Carolina.
Yeah,
Israeli drone maker. General Atomics is one of the big ones. Northrop Grumman is another one. I mean, you just name the top 10. There are over 500 companies in the United States that make drones or drone components. It's the hot item. It's the biggest growing, fastest growing military industrial operation that there is. So there are plenty of places where one can go and protest, and we've been doing that regularly. Recently, the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, had provisions in it about the military being able to detain indefinitely American citizens on American property, soil. And that was greatly debated within, well, not greatly debated, U.S. Congress. Nothing is greatly debated. But it's one of those things that we have to be very watchful of, is this encroachment of using our own military against our own citizens.
And the other thing I wanted to comment on was the VA and the military and illness of returning veterans from Iraq and from the Gulf. And I remember hearing a speaker who said that the dirty bombs that they were using atomized or aerosolized the contents of those bombs, those weapons, and that was probably the cause of the illness that a lot of soldiers were coming back with.
Well, the Gulf War syndrome is certainly something that has not fully been identified. I mean, what is causing these symptoms that so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that were part of Gulf War I have. And part of it was that, you know, when the United States blew up a lot of Israeli, Iraqi tanks that were massed along the Iraqi border, the Kuwaiti border, and were using shells that had depleted uranium. Because that makes the shell heavier, it goes faster, it hits harder, and like that. But then when it hits, it atomizes, and these particulates that it ingested, just as in Agent Orange. You know, it took the U.S. government, 40 years to acknowledge that Agent Orange had caused problems within our own military. They still don't acknowledge it causes problems against Vietnamese, but against our own military, they finally acknowledged it. And we're in the same process right now with depleted uranium, that the government, even though there have been private studies about, and there's the anecdotal evidence of so many people in our military that are suffering from something. And you have in Iraq and Afghanistan, we already have lawsuits that have been filed against the U.S. government because of the burn pits, the pits that were dug at every one of the military bases where all the trash was thrown into, and trash that came from the Iraqi community, trash that was generated on the military bases, and a lot of materials that were brought from Iraqi munitions facilities and other types of military facilities were burned in big pits, and all of this stuff went up in the air. And there are a lot of military and civilian U.S. government workers that are coming down with all sorts of respiratory and cancer. But the government yet is not correlating the burn pits, but there are lawsuits now that are against the government to try to ferret this out. The probability of there ever being a strong central government in Afghanistan was pretty low, because the country is not built on central government. It's built on tribal arrangements in the regions. And I don't see that there's been any major progress toward a central government. If you really look at it, the regional, the provincial areas are still under the control of the warlords of the areas. And in fact, just last week in the New York Times was a front page article about one of the warlords, Ismail Khan, who virtually ran all of western Afghanistan, Herat and all that area. He's already saying he's reforming his militia. He's getting ready for when the U.S. leaves. So, as what happened after the Soviet invasion, where the warlords from the various parts of the country started fighting each other, and really there was more rape, pillage, and plunder when the former Mujahideen, the former freedom fighters, became the warlords and started fighting among themselves. There was more violence there than really with the Soviet army. And that it was the violence among the same people who are still there, who are in the government now, who have been, I mean, the Afghans are smart. Boy, they're smart. They're wily. They are. And they see, okay, another government's coming in, invading us. They're bringing tons of money. They're bringing tons of weapons. They're bringing this, that, and the other thing. So how do we endure this for a little while? We get what we can from them, and we live to fight another day. And so everybody's kind of getting ready for the eventual end of the U.S. involvement there, which has meant that tens of thousands of Afghans have already been killed, that there have been some schools that have been built by the U.S., there have been some clinics that have been built, but when you really look at what probably, in my opinion, is going to happen, Afghanistan will be what it has been, which is a society based on very strong tribal relationships, and it will go back into that. And the plight of women and children will be very difficult, as it always has been. And I think we should prepare ourselves for continued violence. And it's not like it's calm now, is it? I mean, this is a very violent place, with us being a great part of the violence being wreaked upon Afghans. When we leave, at least we will not be the ones that will be killing Afghans. It will be Afghans themselves that are resorting out what they want their country to look like. And it will not be anything, in my opinion, that will be a pillar of democracy. It won't be a place that will be attractive to women who want to get jobs and want to have a different type of life. I think there will be a huge exodus again of people from Afghanistan. There will be camps that will, well, there'll be a lot of educated Afghans that will, again, make their way to Europe and to the United States and say, well, the National Defense University of Pakistan, the university that trains senior military officials and senior government civilians, that there were some former U.S. officials that were coming to Pakistan and would like to talk about U.S. foreign policy. And so that's how I became an invited speaker at the National Defense University as a retired Army colonel and as a former U.S. diplomat. And they forgot to put on the thing that she would also be talking about drones. And so we had some 3-star generals that showed up at my talk. I mean, I was kind of amazed and a little bit taken aback because I haven't been invited to the U.S. National Defense College in the United States. I've not been invited back to the State Department for them to hear my views on U.S. foreign policy. But here in Pakistan, I had the opportunity to talk to generals and senior civilian officials that were attending that school. Despite the travel warning that was put out 5 days before we went to the United States. This was not just a travel advisory, of which there's always one for Pakistan, but this was a specific travel warning American individuals and groups do not come to Pakistan. There's been conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and there's been attacks from both sides, although the disproportionate amount of attacks and the type of attacks certainly weighted on the Israeli side. I mean, they're generally 10 times more armaments that are used on the Pakistanis than the Palestinians than on the Israelis. The land grabs that are going on. I mean, there are films that are out, including Occupation 101, that is very interesting because they have every one of the Israeli prime ministers saying publicly that the state of Israel should take as much land as it possibly can. So that's part of it, you know, whether from, I'm becoming more and more convinced that the state of Israel, no matter what administration is in, whatever prime minister, that they intend to keep inch by inch by inch by inch by inch trying to push the Palestinians out until the state of Israel covers that whole area. The international peace accords that have happened, the Oslo Accords, have actually been very detrimental to the Palestinians. Very detrimental to them. Unless, certainly the United States has been supporting Israel in what it's been doing. It hasn't stopped them doing it. European countries are much more critical of what Israel is doing, but the international leverage on Israel really comes through the United States, and no American administration really has been willing to put sanctions on Israel for what it's doing. In contrast to the Palestinians, where the Palestinians went to the UN General Assembly last year, if you remember in November, and requested special status. Well, just special status so they could join UN organizations like UNESCO and things like that. They didn't ask for statehood, but they asked for the ability as a, I can't remember quite what the body is, but there's a mechanism within the UN that states that are not recognized as states yet can join international organizations. And the vote of the UN General Assembly was, yes, you can. Well, the United States was saying, the United States, Israel, Micronesia, and Palau, which are the four that always vote together, said, well, if you attempt this and succeed, then we are taking money away from the UN. And so they defunded UNESCO. The United States now no longer gives any money to UNESCO because they accepted the Palestinian membership. And then now the Palestinians are going one step further, probably on the 27th of November, to ask for one more step that will lead toward statehood. And the U.S. has already said, we are considering stopping the payments to the Palestinian Authority.
So the
So-
answer is no, there is no solution until Israel just wipes them out.
No, well, then back to your question. I'm just telling some of the avenues that the Palestinians are trying to do to create more international awareness of their situation, and to see if international bodies are going to recognize them. And I think that's a very good, I think that's a good strategy for them to be pursuing, while in the United States, we keep trying to find us, like people in this room, trying to push for some member of our government that will finally make a statement toward Israel that will indicate some sort of displeasure toward what Israel is doing. I mean, there has been, it's a terrible position right now for Palestine, because Palestine just keeps getting eaten away. And the Palestinians say, we're here to stay. We're not about to be pushed into the sea, to use other people's expressions on this. I don't know what I don't know how this is going to be resolved, other than the United States has to step up to the plate and really talk sternly to the Israeli government about how this is just totally unacceptable. So many places that a different way of approaching working with other countries or resolving critical issues can be done without the threat of military power or the actual use of it, as we're seeing more now.
The religious right and Congress have been very influential in Obama's policies, and have been very influential in Bush's policies. And I think that many Jews voted for, tend to be more democratic, vote Democratic. And we've spoken to Jews here in this community, and it's interesting what they say. They say that they said that they would not vote for Obama because he did not support Israel. It's an interesting, it's a sort of mind-boggling idea, and I just wanted to.
Well, that's, I know within the Jewish community of, those who support Israel no matter what happens, and so many members of the Jewish community who are taking public stances saying, we don't agree at all with what they're doing. In fact, Jews Say No is a very big organization. What's the other one? Jewish Voices for Peace. Oh my goodness, those are organizations that have really been so out in front to challenge what Israel's doing. If Congress people are starting to speak out and challenge what Israel's doing, you can be guaranteed they're going to get an office call from AIPAC, and they're going to be threatened that if you continue to speak out like this, there's going to be, in your home county, we're going to mount a vicious attack on you because you are anti-Semitic. And that's one of the things that tragically is pulled out for any sort of criticism of the policies of the State of Israel, is that you're called an anti-Semite. And that's not what it's all about. We're not criticizing the Jewish people, we're criticizing the policies of the state. I was hopeful that our new president, who 4 years ago said perhaps it was time for the United States to talk to people instead of use military force on them, I was hopeful that the Obama administration would actually come through on that. They have had apparently 3 meetings, but the political pressures that are coming in from Israel, about you've got to do something about Iran, you've got to do something about it. Because in what I understand is a mistranslated quote, where the the Israeli government and many officials of the U.S. government say that President Ahmadinejad, who will be leaving office next year, had said that essentially Israel does not have a right to exist. But the translations by Persian linguists, my understanding is said no, that the type of government that does the things essentially to the Palestinians that Israel is doing should not exist in that way. But that's not the way that makes good
As far
story.
as I'm concerned, one of the only good things that Obama has done in the 4 years that he's been in office was this past summer, he sent a couple of very strong messages to Israel at a time when the expectation of an Israeli preemptive strike against Iran was pretty strong. He sent a couple of very strong messages to Israel that the United States would not follow Israel into a war with Iran, at least at this time. He canceled some joint military operations or exercises that were supposed to occur this past summer. There were a couple of other things that he did that
No, thank you very much. That is very important. Yes, he did say when Yahoo said that there's got to be a red line, Obama said, no, we're not doing red lines. And thank you, because that is exactly right. He did stand up for it.
A production of Anibal Ibarra.
AnibalShow.com.
AnibalShow.com.